The golden sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cottonwood Creek. When Olivia Patton first noticed the stranger sitting silently at the edge of her porch, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, not speaking a word, just watching the horizon as if waiting for something that never came. She hadn't spoken to a man outside of necessity since burying her husband 6 months prior, and she certainly had no intention of starting with this one. It was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was no place for a widow of 26 to be alone. Olivia had learned this harsh truth when Thomas died of pneumonia after a winter cattle drive, leaving her with their modest ranch house at the edge of town, a dwindling bank account, and memories that haunted her like ghosts dancing at the corners of her vision. The stranger appeared again the next evening and the one after that. Same time, same place, sitting on the hard-packed dirt beside her porch steps, back against the support post, long legs stretched out before him. He never approached the house proper, never tried to engage her in conversation. Just nodded respectfully when she emerged to water her struggling flower beds or hang laundry in the dying light. By the 5th evening, curiosity had gotten the better of her. Through the lace curtains of her front window, Olivia studied him. Tall and broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather vest, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Not young, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so. His revolver sat low on his hip, but there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. Just a patient stillness that unnerved her more than any aggressive advance might have. On the 7th evening, she brought out a glass of water and set it wordlessly on the porch railing before retreating inside. When she checked later, the glass was empty and placed neatly on the step. "He's back again," Martha Wheeler informed her the following week when she stopped by to deliver eggs from her henhouse. Martha was the closest thing Cottonwood Creek had to a town gossip, which meant she knew everything about everyone. "He's not bothering anyone," Olivia replied, arranging the eggs in her basket. "Quinn Forrester," Martha said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Rode in with the cattle from Texas last month. Sheriff says he's a straight shooter, fought in the war, worked ranches all over. Been asking about you at the general store." Olivia's hand stilled. "What does he want with me?" Martha shrugged. "Not for me to say, but a widow with your looks won't stay lonely unless she chooses to." "I'm not lonely," Olivia replied too quickly. "And I'm certainly not looking for another husband to bury." But that night, she found herself watching the clock, wondering if he would appear again. When he did, taking his usual spot as the church bell chimed 6, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. The summer heat was relentless that year. Dust coated everything, and the creek that gave the town its name had shrunk to little more than a trickle. On particularly brutal afternoons, Olivia would retreat to the root cellar, the only place cool enough to provide relief. It was during one such retreat that disaster struck. She didn't hear the horse approach over the howling wind. The first warning was the acrid smell of smoke that reached her even underground. When she emerged from the cellar, she saw flames licking at her roof, whipped into a frenzy by the dry wind. A prairie fire had jumped the creek bed and ignited her barn, the flames already spreading to the main house. Panic seized her as she raced toward the well, but before she could reach it, a figure on horseback thundered into the yard. Quinn Forrester leapt from his mount before it had fully stopped, leading a second horse loaded with water barrels. "Get back!" he shouted, the first words she'd ever heard from him. His voice was deep and commanding, roughened by years of trail dust. For the next hour, they fought the fire together, Quinn climbing onto the roof with buckets, while Olivia formed a line with neighbors who arrived after seeing the smoke. By nightfall, they had saved the house, though the barn was a total loss, Exhausted, covered in soot, Olivia collapsed onto her porch steps. Quinn handed her a tin cup of water, his own face streaked with ash. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke. He nodded once, then turned to leave. "Wait," she called. "Your name. It's Quinn, isn't it?" He paused, looking back at her with eyes the color of a stormy sky. "Yes, madam, I'm Olivia Patton." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges. "I know." The next evening, he didn't sit on the ground. She'd placed a chair on the porch, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it. Still, they barely spoke, just shared the silence as the stars appeared one by one in the deepening twilight. Slowly, over the following weeks, words began to emerge between them like shy creatures venturing into the open. Small observations about the weather or livestock prices. Nothing personal, nothing that might cross the invisible line Olivia had drawn around her grief. It was Sheriff Dawson who finally told her why Quinn had come to Cottonwood Creek. "Your husband saved his life," the sheriff explained when she encountered him at the mercantile. "During that blizzard last winter, Quinn's horse broke through the ice at Deer Creek Crossing. Thomas pulled him out, gave him his own coat, caught his death doing it, I reckon." Olivia's hands trembled as she set down the bolt of fabric she'd been examining. Quinn never said. "Not surprising. Man carries his debts close to his chest." Sheriff Dawson adjusted his hat. "Just thought you should know." That evening, when Quinn took his seat on the porch, Olivia joined him, settling into the rocking chair her husband had made for her as a wedding present. "Why didn't you tell me about Thomas?" she asked without preamble. Quinn's expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "Didn't seem right to remind you of your loss. So instead you sit on my porch every evening watching the sunset, paying respects," he said quietly, "to a good man, and keeping an eye on what he left behind." "I don't need looking after, Mr. Forrester." His lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Never thought you did, Mrs. Patton." The harvest season brought cattle drives and the temporary swelling of Cottonwood Creek's population. Cowhands fresh from the trail filled the saloon at night, their boisterous celebrations often spilling into the streets. Olivia kept her doors locked and her late husband's shotgun loaded, though she'd never had cause to use it. Quinn continued his evening vigils, but now they exchanged more than just pleasantries. He told her about the vast expanses of Texas where he'd been raised, about fighting for the Confederacy more out of geographic loyalty than political conviction, about the years after the war when he drifted from ranch to ranch, never finding a place that felt like home. She found herself sharing stories, too, about growing up the daughter of a Philadelphia businessman who'd lost everything in the panic of '73, about meeting Thomas when he came east to sell cattle, about their journey west to start a new life together. "You could go back," Quinn suggested one evening as she described the tree-lined streets and brick homes of her childhood. "To Philadelphia. Your parents still there?" Olivia shook her head. "Father passed 2 years ago. Mother followed soon after. There's nothing for me there now." She gazed across the rugged landscape, painted in shades of orange and purple by the setting sun. "Besides, this is home now, for better or worse." As autumn approached, Quinn began helping with repairs around the property. He rebuilt the barn with lumber hauled from the sawmill 20 miles away, working from dawn until dusk, refusing payment beyond the meals Olivia provided. Their conversations grew longer, often lasting until the stars were thick overhead. "Did you have family back in Texas?" she asked one night as they shared coffee on the porch. A shadow crossed his face. "Had a wife, Caroline. Lost her and our baby boy to fever in '71. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. Olivia reached out impulsively, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. "I'm sorry," He didn't pull away. Been carrying that a long time. Gets lighter, sharing it with someone who understands. When the first autumn storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing sheeting rain and winds that rattled the window panes, Quinn didn't come. Olivia found herself pacing the front room, peering anxiously through the curtains at the empty yard. She told herself it was foolish to worry he was a grown man who had survived far worse than a rainstorm. Yet when a knock came at her door well after midnight, she rushed to answer it, heedless of propriety or the fact that she wore only her nightgown beneath her shawl. Quinn stood on her threshold, soaked to the skin and supporting a young boy of perhaps 12 or 13 who looked even more drenched and thoroughly miserable. Found him out by Carson's Creek, Quinn explained as Olivia ushered them inside. Stage was held up, everyone else killed. The boy Peter, they learned when he finally spoke, had hidden in the underbrush while bandits murdered the driver, guard, and his uncle who had been escorting him to live with relatives in California. Quinn had come across the wreckage while returning from a supply run to the neighboring town. Sheriffs forming a posse at first light, Quinn said as Olivia wrapped blankets around the shivering child. They headed north with the strongbox. You're going after them, she said. It wasn't a question, his eyes met hers. Have to. In the 3 days Quinn was gone, Olivia cared for young Peter, who gradually emerged from his shocked silence to reveal a bright, curious mind and a heartbreaking bravery in the face of his loss. She found herself wondering what Quinn's son might have been like, had he lived to grow up. When the posse returned, they brought both justice and grim news. The bandits had been tracked to their hideout and killed in the ensuing gunfight. Quinn had taken a bullet to his shoulder, but insisted it was merely a graze. Olivia knew better when she saw the pallor beneath his tan, and the way he held himself rigidly to avoid showing pain. Against his protests, she ordered him into her spare bedroom, Thomas's sick room, during his final days, and sent for the town doctor. "Fool man," she muttered as she helped him remove his blood-stained shirt. "What good is your watching over me if you get yourself killed?" "Didn't know you cared, Mrs. Patton," he replied, his attempt at humor undermined by a grimace as she began cleaning the wound. "Of course I care," she snapped, hands gentle despite her tone. "You think I let just anyone sit on my porch every evening?" The bullet had gone clean through, which Dr. Miller declared a blessing. "Rest, keep it clean, and no riding for at least a week," he ordered before departing. With young Peter installed in the attic room and Quinn confined to bed, Olivia suddenly found her empty house transformed into a bustling home. She rose early to cook breakfast, tended to Quinn's wound, helped Peter with reading lessons, and worked alongside the boy to maintain the property. In the evenings, the three would gather in Quinn's room, where Peter would proudly read aloud from one of Thomas's old books while Quinn offered encouragement. Sometimes, when the pain kept him awake, Olivia would sit beside his bed long after Peter had gone to sleep, talking softly about everything and nothing until his breathing deepened into slumber. 2 weeks passed this way, and Olivia found herself dreading the inevitable day when things would return to normal, when Peter's relatives would send for him, when Quinn would be well enough to leave. On a clear October morning, a telegram arrived from San Francisco. Peter's aunt and uncle would arrive on the following week's stage to collect him. The boy received the news with mixed emotions: excitement to meet his new family tempered by reluctance to leave the haven he'd found. That same day, Quinn rose from bed and walked unassisted to the porch, where he took his customary seat as if he'd never been away. "Doc says I'm healing well," he told Olivia as she joined him with cups of coffee. "Be able to ride by week's end." She nodded, keeping her expression carefully neutral. "That's good news. Thought I might head up to Montana. Heard they're hiring hands at the big spreads up there. Something cold settled in Olivia's chest. Montana's a long way. Too far to ride back for evening visits, he agreed, his eyes on the distant mountains. That night, unable to sleep, Olivia stood at her bedroom window gazing at the stars. The thought of returning to her solitary existence after these weeks of unexpected companionship left her feeling hollow. Yet what right did she have to ask Quinn to stay? He was a drifter by nature, a man accustomed to following the horizon, and she was still Thomas's widow, still wore his ring, still slept on her side of the bed as if he might return to claim the other. When morning came, she found Quinn in the barn, saddling his horse. "Thought you weren't leaving until the end of the week," she said, trying to keep the accusation from her voice. "Best to make a clean break." He tightened the cinch, still favoring his injured shoulder. "For the boys' sake." "And yours. And if I asked you to stay," his hands stilled. Slowly he turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Would you?" Words failed her. Instead, she stepped forward, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingertips. His hand covered hers, warm and strong, and for a moment they stood frozen in the dim light of the barn, the only sound their quickened breathing. "I can't replace him," Quinn said finally, his voice rough. "Wouldn't try to. I'm not asking you to." Olivia swallowed hard. "But I don't want to be alone anymore." His kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When they parted, she saw in his eyes the same mix of hope and fear that tumbled inside her own heart. "Quinn," she whispered, the first time she'd spoken his name with such tenderness. "Stay. Please." His horse remained saddled but untethered as they walked back to the house hand in hand, the morning sun casting their shadows long across the yard. Peter's relatives arrived as scheduled, a kind-faced couple who embraced the boy with genuine affection. Before departing, Peter hugged Olivia fiercely, then turned to Quinn with solemn dignity. "Will you write to me? Tell me about the horses." Quinn knelt to the boy's level. "Every month. And maybe next summer, if your aunt and uncle agree, you could visit for a spell." The stagecoach had barely disappeared from view when the sheriff rode up with news that would again alter the course of their lives. "Got word from the territorial office," he announced without dismounting. "That gang you helped take down, they'd been working these parts for years. There's a reward." He handed Quinn an official-looking document, quite substantial, split among the posse members. The sum was enough to buy a modest herd of cattle and the equipment needed to work them. Quinn stared at the paper, then at Olivia. "Seems I might have a stake to put down roots after all," he said when the sheriff had gone. "If that's still what you want." Instead of answering, Olivia led him to the small plot behind the house where a wooden cross marked Thomas's grave. She knelt briefly, straightening the wildflowers she'd placed there the previous day, then stood and removed her wedding ring. "He brought me here to start a new life," she said, tucking the ring into a small pouch she would later place among Thomas's mementos. "I think he'd understand me starting another." They were married by the circuit preacher when he passed through Cottonwood Creek, 2 weeks later. The ceremony was simple, just the two of them and a handful of townsfolk who'd gathered in Martha Wheeler's front parlor. Quinn wore a new shirt, and Olivia a dress of deep blue rather than black, a conscious step away from mourning. "Never thought I'd get another chance," Quinn confessed that night as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. "After Caroline, figured that part of life was over for me." Olivia leaned into his embrace. "I felt the same, like I'd had my allotment of happiness, and all that remained was to endure what came after. And now," she smiled up at him, "now I think perhaps life is more generous than we gave it credit for." With Quinn's reward money and Olivia's remaining savings, they purchased 50 head of cattle and began rebuilding the ranch. The work was hard, the days long, but they faced each challenge together. When spring arrived, bringing new calves and green grass, they took their first small herd to market and returned with enough profit to buy breeding stock and hire 2 hands. Peter visited that summer as promised, arriving on the stage with a trunk full of books and boundless enthusiasm. He followed Quinn everywhere, absorbing every lesson about ranching with keen interest, and in the evenings regaled them with stories of his new life in San Francisco. "Would you mind," he asked shyly on his last night with them, "if I came again next year?" Quinn and Olivia exchanged glances. "We'd be disappointed if you didn't," Quinn told him. "In fact, we're counting on your help with the new edition." "New edition?" Olivia's hand drifted to her still flat stomach. "The doctor says January or perhaps February." The boy's face lit up with understanding. "I'm going to be like a brother, the very best kind," Olivia assured him. "One who comes when he chooses and leaves before he can become truly annoying." On cold winter evenings when the snow piled deep against the windows, Quinn would tell the story of how he came to Cottonwood Creek, of the debt he owed to a good man, of the quiet vigil he kept on a widow's porch, of the evening she finally spoke his name and changed everything. Their daughter was born during a January blizzard that kept the doctor from reaching them. Quinn delivered the baby himself, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he placed the squalling infant in Olivia's arms. "Caroline," Olivia whispered, looking up at her husband's stunned face. "After your first wife, if that's all right." Tears glistened in his eyes as he nodded. "Thomas for a middle name, then, for the man who made this possible." As Caroline grew, so did the ranch. Quinn's skill with horses and Olivia's head for business proved a formidable combination. They added acreage, built a larger barn, and eventually constructed a new house, though they kept the old one standing. Unwilling to erase the place where their story had begun, Peter returned every summer until he left for college back east, always bringing books and tales of the wider world. When he graduated, he surprised them by announcing his intention to study law and eventually return to the Arizona territory. "This place gets in your blood," he explained. "Besides, someone needs to keep you two out of trouble in your old age." Quinn, his dark hair now streaked with silver, laughed. "Old age is a ways off yet, boy." But time passed as it always does, measured in the changing seasons, in cattle drives and harvests, in Caroline's growth from infant to child to young woman with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Quinn took Olivia's hand and led her to the old porch where he had once maintained his silent vigil. "You ever wonder," she asked as they settled into the weathered chairs, "what might have happened if I hadn't spoken your name that day?" "If you'd gone to Montana," Quinn considered this, watching the sunset paint the familiar landscape in gold. "I'd have come back," he said finally. "Might have taken longer, but some things are just meant to be." Olivia smiled, thinking of the long journey that had brought them here, of loss and healing, of second chances seized, of the family they'd built together from the ashes of their separate griefs. "Quinn," she said softly, the name still sweet on her tongue after all these years. He turned to her, love evident in every line of his face. "Yes, I'm glad you sat on my porch all those evenings, even when I pretended not to notice." His laugh was warm as he reached for her hand. "Best waiting I ever did." As darkness fell, they remained side by side, two figures silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from the house that had witnessed both their separate sorrows and their shared joy, a testament to the resilience of hearts brave enough to love again.